Hello, my name is Debbie Neat. I'm a retired 34-year educator. I was also a district leader over prevention and intervention programs. I have also been a trainer for the Department of Education for the school safety program for the last 20 years or so. Today, I'll be providing a micro training, and we're going to be looking at documents that were created specifically for your school safety assessment and prevention team, otherwise known as the SSAPT. This is an acronym you're going to need to get used to because we use it a lot. So let's take a look at the first document. Let's take a look at what the documents are that you will be walking through. The first document will be the SSAPT Agenda. Do you remember what SSAPT stands for? School Safety Assessment and Prevention Team. We'll also be looking at an operational calendar, and we'll be looking at the strategic plan. Again, these were documents that were created specifically for your team to keep you on track and to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the grant. So let's take a look at the agenda. So if we were in person, I would be stomping my foot and saying, this is really important. It's very important that your team uses this agenda. We can't require it. That's why it's recommended, but it is highly recommended. And what we know from schools who have used it is that it has actually helped them to stay on track with what they're supposed to be doing when they meet, as is required by the grant, and how to walk through looking at data and coming up with your plan to address your safety concerns. So let's walk through this. So up here, it kind of reminds you of the process that you'll be learning in the L100 training. And then you list who the members are that are present at your meeting. And then we suggest that you review your calendar to see what you have decided, what you've done, what you haven't done. And then you start reviewing your data. Now, we do recommend that you look at incident data in your student management system. You can also look at surveys, climate surveys, completed by staff, students, or parents. How do they feel about the campus? How do they feel about the safety of the campus? Or you can do risk and protective factor surveys to really take a look at what's going on in the lives of students and those things that are helping them to be resilient. So as you look at that data, you would list what data you reviewed, and then you would list what were the safety concerns that were identified by this data. Then you want to start to come up with a plan. So you're going to have to summarize those concerns. You might come up with multiple concerns, but you probably can only address 3 at one time. So we call those priority focused areas. So you can see here, it says top 3 PFAs. That's priority focus area. All right, so once you've got those listed, then what you're going to do is think about, okay, who is it that we should address with our concerns? Looking at data, who are the groups of students that you're concerned about? And you would decide who would be the LRE cohort group. Who are those students in the group of students that are having some safety concerns? Let's say it would be 8th graders or 4th graders, or maybe it's juniors, maybe it's males, maybe it's females. Also, the same would be true for the content that you're targeting with your social and emotional learning. Who is it that needs this information? Then the next thing that you would address is, what is the content? And so we've got the target group, and then what would be the content that you would teach for your law-related education that addresses those safety concerns? Or what is the social and emotional learning that would provide the skills to help students to be able to change their behavior so that their behavior is more pro-social and they're actually able to be present in the classroom and function and progress academically. Also, the thing that we also want to identify is what are the prevention activities that would be universal or tier 1 for all students, whether you're talking about what your counselor and social worker would be implementing or what the SRO or probation officer would be implementing. Then we would take a look at tier 2 and tier 3. So again, we're thinking about the multi-tiered system of support pyramid, and we're looking at, tier 1 for all kids, tier 2 for small groups of students who need a little bit more support, and then tier 3 for those groups of students that need one-on-one intensive support. So what are those things that the officer would provide, and what are those things that the counselor or the social worker would provide, those particular kinds of interventions? Also, how do you coordinate with other campus programs and services? And so we don't want to duplicate programs. What we want to do is work together with what's already on the campus. We also want to be able to bring in programs and services also. And so seeing what's already in place and then what we need to build to address specific needs. Also, in this grant, we talk about strategic visibility. And what this means is, where should adults be placed around the campus? Where and when, what day, what time of day? And this way, when we're looking at our data and we're seeing when incidents are happening, then we can have adults in those places where these incidents happen, and we can address things directly. Now, this isn't about trying to catch kids being bad. This is really about engaging in relationships with kids and actually building positive relationships with kids and encouraging them, again, to engage in pro-social activities. Also, how is the officer or the counselor or the social worker building positive relationships with the school community? What are they doing to identify themselves as there for a specific purpose, but also there to build relationships with staff and students and parents and the broader community? Also thinking in terms, again, what are those services and resources that are out in the community that can be brought into the school to help, or what services can we refer students and families to? And then what are some activities that the counselor, the social worker, the probation officer, the officer are engaging in that builds relationships, and they're modeling pro-social behaviors as well? Sometimes they are running different clubs or overseeing different sports or having specific activities that are happening, things like that. We want to know how they're engaging to build these relationships. Then reviewing previous action items that have been on previous agendas or on your calendar that we'll be taking a look at next. And also, what are some items to be completed between now and the next meeting? So that's your recommended agenda for the team to use as you meet per the requirements. So now let's take a look at the operational calendar. So what we can see here is it's exactly that. It's a calendar. And what we want you to do here is to plan ahead. What are the activities that need to happen, by whom and when? So when you look at it, what's the activity? Who's responsible for completing that? And then when do we want that to happen? Is the item completed? And what are some additional comments that we want to make? So let's look at an example of a completed calendar, and you can see some of the items and the wording that's used here. So again, you're filling it out based on the school, and then what are the activities that need to happen? So we need to review the operational plan, and we need to collaborate regarding the required meetings. Now remember that the team is required to meet once a quarter. So it's important to make sure that you're calendaring that in the school calendar quarters, all right? The people who are supposed to attend, etc. And then thinking in terms of the grant also requires that there is oversight by district leadership and also by the agency supervisor if you have an officer or a probation officer. So making sure that you're calendaring in those two required meetings. Making sure that you're introducing your personnel that you got through the grant, whether that's an officer, a counselor, or a social worker. Also making sure that you're introducing them to the broader school community so that they know about the grant and why this person is there on the campus, and how their job is different than how people might think of an officer or how people might think of the work of a counselor or a social worker, that it really is specific to creating this safe school campus. Also, you want to think about activities that the person would engage in. Again, what are those resources? What are those connections that are happening on the campus, and how can they be a part of that? Also, we want to make sure that the SRO and the counselor and the social worker are reaching out to community agencies. And so making sure that that is happening, and so calendaring that in as well. And then thinking in terms of there's required quarterly meetings, right? But we really do strongly recommend that you meet monthly to review your data. So much happens in 3 months, and it's way too much time passes, and things that you didn't address, and things that you weren't able to follow up on. So even though we can only require a quarterly meeting, we strongly recommend a monthly meeting. So you can see that this has been calendared in, and to remind you that you'll be looking at your data and really creating your, updating your plan from there. So these are a few things that ought to be included in your plan. And so to help you to make sure that you're including real important things, we also have this operational calendar checklist. And so you can see here, the first page is if you're awarded an officer. And these are some basic things that are requirements that you need to make sure are a part of your calendar. If you have a counselor or a social worker as a part of your grant, then these are items that are basic that need to be in your calendar. But also notice that down here on both pages, it says, this is not an exhaustive list, that you really need to check the School Safety Program Guidance Manual to make sure that you're addressing all the requirements and that you're calendaring them in as appropriate. All right, moving on then, let's take a look at what does it look like as you move through the year. So here's the calendar again, and it's a living document. You don't create it at the beginning of the year and then never change it. It's not set in stone, it's alive. And so you're modifying it as your data changes. And so what you can see here is, we started off the year with some things on the calendar. And then when we met again and we looked at data, we needed to calendar in some different things. We needed to change some things. And then we met again and we're changing things again. And so we do recommend that you change your font and the color of your font. And that can help you to see how you're modifying your calendar as you go throughout the year based on what's happening now, based on the data that you're reviewing and the decisions that you're making. So moving on, another document that you want to use is your strategic plan. And so you want to have a plan that guides you through the implementation of this grant. So I'm going to walk you through the components of this, and then I'll show you one that has some of the items filled in, just to kind of give you an example. So you can see right here, we started in with the priority areas. And so if you think back to applying for the grant, you identified specific needs. Why did you need the grant? What were the safety concerns that you had? So you would put that here in your priority areas. Then what are the inputs? Now, you get a grant from the state, and that gives you a person, either an officer or a counselor or a social worker. But what are you providing as a school and as a team? What's the experience? What's the expertise? What's the time? What are the resources and supports that the school and the district are providing for you to be able to implement this program successfully? Then the next section is called outputs. So these are the people that are involved in the grant, either a counselor, social worker, or an officer or a probation officer, site administrator, district administrator, and agency supervisor if you have an officer or a probation officer. So here you're going to be listing the participants and the things that they would be in charge of. And then what are the activities that they would be a part of or implementing or providing? And then what would be the products of those activities? So one example that I might give you is that the site administrator is required to make sure that the quarterly meetings are held. So that would be something that you would list here. And the activity is quarterly meetings held, and the products are a regular review of data. So just kind of an example of how you would fill that out. But you'll see more examples on the next page. Then the next section of this document, what are the outcomes? So if you do these things that you said needed to be done, what would be the outcomes for year one? Typically in year one for a grant, we want to see an increase in knowledge. So knowledge that everyone on the campus would need to have in order to help create a safe school climate. Then in year two for a grant, typically what the outcomes are about behavior changes. So all of these people that are on your campus and are a part of this grant, how might their behavior change in order to have a safe, supportive campus? And then in year three of a grant, typically you want to see an attitude change. And I know that seems maybe backwards. Sometimes people think, well, don't you have to change your attitude first before you change your behavior? Actually, it doesn't happen like that. And so let me kind of give you an example of smoking cessation. So in year one, you would go to a program to help you learn about how to quit smoking, and you would be encouraged to actually stop smoking. So you would stop smoking long before you want to stop smoking. But by year three, you probably have lost that urge, and you have lots of tools in place in order to change your behavior and stay on track with smoking cessation. So that's just kind of an example of how this happens over time. And then the last part of this document is, how are you going to evaluate? And if you look at this, again, this is exactly what we just went through with the agenda. So every time you're meeting, you're going through your plan and you're making sure that you're on track. So let's take a look at what would be specific to a part of your evaluation. Thinking in terms of what are the actions that need to be taken, or you're going to assess what's your need. You're going to come up with a plan. You're going to implement that plan. You're going to collect data on how it's going. Who's involved? How often are they meeting? What are the changes that you're seeing? You're going to analyze and interpret that data and come up with a report. And that's part of what you're doing every time you're meeting as a team. You're reporting back on those things that you have implemented and whether things are working and if it's making a difference or not. And then you repeat. Every time you're meeting, you're repeating this process. So this is the document that you will fill out as a team to guide the direction of your program. So let's take a look at what it might look like if it was filled in. And these are just some examples. Certainly, we're trying to guide you here, but we don't want you to just copy this. We want you to create your own document. So you can see here when you're looking at what the priority areas are, what are your areas? What are your inputs that you're putting in as a school and as a district? And then the outputs and the participants. What are the activities that they're going to engage in? What are the products of those activities? And then again, what do we want to see different in year one and different in year two and different in year three, so that you can see that over the course of the 3 years of the grant, that you've been able to improve the campus climate and create a safe, supportive environment. Again, it's a continual evaluation process, and this reminds you of what that process looks like. So this has been a review of these 3 important documents that we created specifically for your team. And so we really do strongly encourage you to use these documents. Good luck in your first year, and thanks for being here.